Ethan trudged through the endless white landscape, each step sinking slightly into the thick snow. The icy wind cut through his jacket and gnawed at his face, making his eyes water and his teeth chatter. This planet, called Nivara, was one of the coldest human settlements he had ever been sent to. Officially, it was uninhabited, a frozen expanse of ice and stone, useful only for geological surveys and rare mineral extraction. He had been alone here for weeks, cataloging mineral deposits and studying the strange frost patterns that covered the cliffs and valleys. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional howl of wind over jagged rocks. His scanner beeped suddenly, a faint, irregular signal flashing across the small screen. Ethan frowned. It wasn't a mineral anomaly. Its reading suggested something alive. Only one problem. The area it was coming from was deep within the storm zone where no human should ever venture. But curiosity and instinct combined. He could not ignore the possibility that someone, or something, was in danger. He adjusted his protective goggles and trudged forward, each step a battle against the blizzard. Snow whipped against his face, stinging, and his boots slipped in the powdery ice. The signal on his scanner pulsed again, slightly stronger. He moved carefully, knowing one wrong step could send him sliding down the icy slope. As he climbed, he spotted two faint, indistinct shapes lying among the snowdrifts. They were small, humanoid, but not human. Their skin shimmered slightly under the snow, patterned like frost, almost translucent. They shivered violently, their breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. Ethan's heart raced. He ran the last few meters and dropped to his knees beside them. The older sister, her body stiff and trembling, had a faint glow on her scaled skin where the frost had begun to form thick patches. Her hands clutched a broken staff, broken in two as if she had been defending herself. The younger sister, smaller and even weaker, tried to curl around her sister for warmth but shivered uncontrollably. Both were barely conscious, and Ethan could see the signs of hypothermia taking hold. He acted fast. Removing his thermal blanket from his pack, he wrapped the two sisters together, his hands numb as he carefully lifted them one by one. Their bodies were surprisingly light, almost delicate, but he treated them as if they weighed as much as a fully grown human. Carrying them back to his small shelter, he felt a sense of urgency he had not experienced in months. These lives depended entirely on him. The shelter was small, only big enough for a few days of living, with a heat core capable of keeping him warm in extreme cold. He laid them down on the insulated mats and connected the heat regulators to their suits. The warmth slowly seeped through the frozen layers of clothing and skin. The older sister, Lyra, stirred first. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing deep amber-colored irises flecked with pale gold. She tried to sit up but collapsed immediately. Too weak to lift herself, Ethan steadied her gently, giving her water from his pack. She looked around, confusion and fear in her gaze, and instinctively moved to shield the younger sister, Sarah, who clung to Lyra's side. Ethan knelt beside them, speaking softly in a calm voice. "It's okay. You're safe now. You don't have to fight anymore." His words were met with silence at first. Lyra studied him suspiciously, her small nostrils flaring as if trying to sense whether he was a threat. Sarah's tiny hand brushed against Ethan's arm, almost instinctively seeking reassurance. As they slowly warmed, their bodies relaxed slightly. The blizzard outside howled louder, rattling the thin walls of the shelter, but inside a fragile sense of calm began to settle. Ethan prepared a simple meal, using rations he had saved for himself, and offered it to them carefully. They hesitated at first, but hunger overcame fear. Lyra broke a piece of the food and handed a small portion to Sarah. They ate slowly, eyes darting between each other and Ethan. The silence was heavy, but Ethan did not rush it. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice soft and melodic but foreign. Ethan fumbled with his portable translator, activating it. "You are safe. My name is Ethan," he said, his voice gentle. The translator buzzed and translated her reply into broken English. "You save us? Why?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because no one should die alone in a storm." His words seemed to resonate with them. Lyra nodded slightly, the first sign of trust, while Sarah's wide eyes reflected relief. As night fell, the temperature inside the shelter dropped, but the heat regulators maintained a tolerable warmth. Ethan watched them sleep, amazed by the delicate structure of their alien features. The frost patterns on their skin glittered softly in the dim light. He thought about the storm outside, how merciless it had been and how close they had come to death. Somehow, in the midst of that icy wasteland, these two lives had crossed his path, and somehow he knew their story was now intertwined with his. The next morning, the sisters had regained some strength. Lyra could stand with support, her amber eyes scanning the room constantly, protective of Sarah. Sarah, though still weak, was energetic, moving around curiously, touching everything with fascination. Ethan showed them how the heat regulators worked, how to operate the small life support systems, and even demonstrated how to make simple meals. They observed him closely, learning fast. Their communication improved gradually, aided by the translator device. They revealed fragments of their story. Their tribe had been attacked by raiders while traveling across Navarra's frozen plains. They had escaped, but in the process they became separated from their family and resources. The journey had been treacherous, and the blizzard had nearly claimed them both. Ethan listened quietly, offering comfort and advice. They never asked for more than he could give, and yet their gratitude was clear in every gesture. Days passed, and a bond began to form. Lyra and Sarah became more confident, helping Ethan maintain the shelter and tending to small repairs. Lyra admired Ethan's strength and ingenuity, while Sarah, playful and curious, often mimicked his movements, asking endless questions. The alien sisters had not only survived the storm but were slowly adapting to their new environment. Yet Ethan noticed something peculiar. They did not want to leave. When he suggested he could take them to a human outpost, a flicker of fear passed across their faces. Humans, they separate families, Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with worry. They study us. Sarah clutched his arm tightly, looking up at him with eyes that pleaded silently. Ethan realized then that this was not just survival, it was trust. They had chosen to depend on him entirely, perhaps in a way their culture dictated as sacred. As the storm raged outside, the three of them remained in the small shelter. Ethan thought about the desolation beyond the walls, how hostile the environment could be, and yet here, warmth and companionship had begun to flourish. Lyra and Sarah had survived against impossible odds, and now in their eyes, he was no longer a stranger. He was the one who had saved their lives, and in some unspoken way, they had already marked him as theirs. One evening, as he watched them drift into sleep, Sarah curled against his side, her small fingers brushing lightly against his arm. Lyra rested nearby, eyes half closed but vigilant. The storm outside seemed distant, almost irrelevant compared to the fragile world they had created inside. Ethan realized something profound. This was more than rescue. They had given him a sense of purpose, a connection he had not felt in months of isolation. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Hope that even in the coldest, most desolate places in the universe, life could endure, and bonds could form in the most unexpected ways. He watched them sleep, and he promised silently that he would protect them, not out of obligation, but because now their lives and his own were inseparably linked. Outside, the blizzard roared, a relentless force of nature. Inside, warmth and light held back the cold. And in that fragile balance, a new chapter began. One of trust, companionship, and the quiet understanding that the storm had brought them together for a reason neither could yet comprehend. Days passed on the frozen planet, and the shelter became a small haven of warmth and life. Ethan found himself adjusting to their presence more than he had expected. The storm outside was relentless, but inside there was laughter, curiosity, and companionship. The alien sisters, Lyra and Sarah, had begun to recover fully. Lyra moved with more confidence now, her amber eyes constantly observing, protective and vigilant. Sarah was a whirlwind of energy, exploring every corner of the shelter, asking questions about every small human object Ethan had brought with him. Ethan watched them as he repaired some minor damage to the shelter caused by the previous blizzard. The sisters' fascination with human technology was almost amusing. Sarah attempted to mimic his movements as he adjusted the heat regulators, while Lyra carefully observed, occasionally asking questions in broken English, aided by the translator. They were quick learners, but Ethan could tell that their bond with him went deeper than curiosity. There was a connection, almost sacred, that went beyond mere survival. One morning, Ethan suggested that they could leave for the human outpost once the storm cleared. He wanted them to be safe and to receive proper care. Lyra's eyes narrowed and she shook her head firmly. Sarah clutched his arm tightly, her small body pressed against him. Ethan realized that their response was not simple fear. They were making a deliberate choice. Why not? Ethan asked gently, kneeling to their level. Humans separate. Study. Lyra replied, her voice steady. We'd stay with you. You save us. Storm chose you. Sarah's wide eyes looked up at him, filled with an intensity that made him pause. Stay forever, she whispered. Home with you. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had rescued them, but in their culture, saving a life meant forming a bond, a sacred promise. He laughed softly, shaking his head. I never expected this, he admitted. I just wanted to help you survive. Lyra's gaze did not waver.
Survive.
Yes, but we want more. You, part of us now. Ethan could feel the weight of their words. They were not demanding. There was no threat in their tone. But there was a certainty, a conviction that left no room for argument. He understood that leaving them now would break the fragile trust they had built, and he could not bring himself to do that. The following days were filled with small routines. Ethan showed them how to repair the heat shields and monitor the weather patterns. Lyra became adept at reading the scanner, while Sarah eagerly learned to operate the communication devices. The sisters' presence turned the shelter from a lonely outpost into a small, lively home. They laughed, teased each other, and sometimes even challenged Ethan in playful ways. The cold outside was relentless, but inside warmth came from companionship, not from the heaters alone. One evening, after ensuring the shelter was secure, Ethan stepped outside briefly to check the equipment. The wind was calmer, and the sky, though gray, seemed less threatening. As he returned, he found the sisters waiting by the entrance, their eyes following him closely. Sarah ran forward, wrapping her small arms around his waist while Lyra's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. We help, Lyra said softly. We stay. With you. Ethan knelt down to meet their gaze. I don't know what will happen next, he said honestly. I can't promise forever, but while you are here I will protect you. Sarah's smile was radiant, her eyes shining with trust. Lyra's expression softened, a quiet acceptance settling over her features. For the first time since his arrival on Nivara, Ethan felt that the storm outside did not matter. The world had shrunk to this small shelter, this fragile warmth, and the bond between three lives that fate had brought together. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan discovered the depth of the sisters' devotion. They followed him everywhere within the shelter and even outside once the storm had softened. They were fascinated by the tools, the instruments, and even the simple routines of human survival. Sarah often asked questions that showed a childlike curiosity, while Lyra's questions were more strategic, always considering their safety and future. Ethan realized that he had become not only a protector but a mentor, a companion and a source of comfort. One morning, while checking the surrounding area for signs of further storms, Ethan noticed a faint shimmer in the distance. Lyra's gaze followed his immediately and she motioned for him to be careful. Sarah clutched his sleeve tightly. The sisters' instincts were sharp. They were aware of the dangers in the icy plains far more than he had anticipated. Together they explored cautiously, each movement deliberate, and Ethan realized how much they had learned from their brief time in the shelter. As they returned, the sisters began helping him with the tasks of daily survival. They collected snow to melt for water, repaired broken instruments, and even began preparing small meals alongside him. Their presence made life easier, more vibrant and more meaningful. Yet, despite their help, Ethan noticed something unusual. They did not speak of leaving. Even when he mentioned the human outpost again, they seemed almost offended at the suggestion. Not home, Lyra said firmly. This, our home, you, our guardian. Sarah's hand tightened around his arm. Forever? Stay, she repeated. Her tone was gentle but unwavering. Ethan laughed quietly, shaking his head. I never thought rescuing two strangers would lead to this, he said. But I suppose I cannot argue with tradition or loyalty. As winter deepened, the bond between them grew stronger. Ethan realized that the sisters had become more than just survivors. Each had a unique way of touching his life. Lyra, with her strength and protective nature, had become a reliable companion in thought and action. Sarah, with her energy and unguarded affection, had become a source of light in the endless white expanse. Together they balanced him, filling the emptiness of solitude that had followed him to Navarra. One night, as the wind howled outside and snowflakes danced against the shelter windows, Ethan sat between them, sharing stories of human life, of Earth and of distant colonies. The sisters listened intently, their eyes wide with fascination. Sarah's small hand rested in his, while Lyra's arm brushed against his shoulder protectively. There was no need for words beyond the simple ones they shared. The connection was complete, silent but powerful. Eventually, Ethan knew the moment of truth would come. The storm outside had softened and the path to the human outpost was clear. He had supplies enough for a journey and was prepared to ensure their safety. But as he spoke to the sisters about leaving, he saw the firmness in their eyes, the quiet intensity of their devotion. "We stay," Lyra said simply. "With you. Forever." Sarah nodded eagerly, her smile radiant. "Home. Here," she whispered. Ethan realized then that this was no longer about rescue alone. The sisters had chosen him as their guardian, their protector, and in a deeper sense, the center of their lives. To take them away now would be to break a sacred bond. He felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose that he had never known before. "I understand," he said finally, a smile spreading across his face. "Then we will stay together." The storm outside continued to rage in its distant fury, but inside the shelter, warmth and life thrived. The alien sisters had survived against impossible odds, and Ethan had become an inseparable part of their story. They laughed, shared stories, and worked together, building a small home in the icy wilderness. The cold world beyond no longer felt hostile. It was simply a backdrop to a fragile, enduring life. Ethan realized something profound. These sisters had not only survived, they had chosen him. And in choosing him, they had given him a new purpose. Life, trust, and companionship had blossomed in the most unlikely of places. And as he watched Lyra and Sarah prepare a simple meal, their movements coordinated, their voices gentle but lively, he understood that this was more than survival. This was belonging. This was family. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt that the storm had not taken anything from him. It had given him everything. Outside, the winds of Navarra continued their eternal dance, sculpting snow and ice into endless shapes. Inside, the small shelter glowed with warmth, laughter, and quiet devotion. 3 lives had come together by chance, by choice, and by the mysterious hand of fate. The storm had brought them together, but it was love, trust, and courage that would keep them bound forever. Ethan looked at the sisters, and they looked back at him, their eyes shining with unspoken understanding. Words were unnecessary. The bond was complete, and in that frozen wilderness, they had found a home not just in a shelter, but in each other. And so, life on Navarra continued. Not as a struggle against the cold, but as a story of warmth, trust, and unbreakable bonds, where 3 souls from different worlds would face every storm together forever.